What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Bourbon and Bets. I'm your host, Zach Stonerock. Flying solo today as Avery is traveling for some family events. So wishing him safe travels to and from, and I hope he's enjoying that. Obviously, family is, very important. So glad he's able to get some time out to be able to do that. Since I am flying solo today, we're just going to jump into a recap of last week, and then we'll talk about this week's picks and this week's games. So last week, Avery and I both struggled. We went 2-3 on our picks that we both shared last week for our season-long pick'em that he and I are doing. So looking at it for me, I took Baltimore. They ended up covering -6.5 at the Jets. Indy tied with Houston. Blankenship missed a 42-yard field goal to be able to close that game out in overtime. Since then, he's been waived. So that's the way the National Football League is. You get picked up to make those kicks, and if you don't make those kicks, next guy up. So I hope he lands on his feet. But for now, the Colts are moving on and going a different direction. To fall back to the Baltimore game real quick, Lamar Jackson actually threw for 3 touchdowns, and 2 of them were to Devin Duvernay, who I was very high on last year. I'm excited to see what he can do this year with Hollywood Brown being out and him stepping into that role with Rashad Bateman. Next game was the Saints at the Falcons. The Falcons were actually leading 23-10 going into the fourth. Michael Thomas ended up having 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, passes from Jameis Winston. So the Saints ended up winning this game 27-26. So that, Saints weren't able to get the cover, but one of those divisional games that Avery was talking about, same with that Colts game. Divisional games are tough. You can really, talent matters less, and it's more so about the emotions and the extra juice that comes with those games. So I missed Indy. I missed the Saints. Next game was Kansas City at Arizona. I took the over of 53.5. The game ended up having 65 points scored. The Chiefs scored 44. The Cardinals had 21. Patrick Mahomes threw for 5 touchdowns to show that he is still probably one of the most elite quarterbacks in the league, despite how tough that division is. And then my final game that I had that was another miss was the Raiders at Chargers, over 52. This game actually ended up at 43 points, with the Chargers coming out on top, 24-19. So my 2 wins were the Ravens covering -6.5 and Kansas City with the over of 53.5. Moving on to Avery's picks, his 2 wins, he had Baltimore also -6.5, but then he also had the Vikings +1.5, taking on the Green Bay Packers. The Vikings pretty much just ran away with his game. Justin Jefferson was a big part of that. 2 touchdowns, 9 catches for like 184 yards. So just goes to show that Justin Jefferson is probably the best receiver in the league right now. I'd put him up there, probably him, Stephon Diggs. And I'm excited to see what Devontae Adams ends up doing long-term with the Raiders as the season progresses. But I'd put those 3 at the top. Obviously, Cooper Kupp. I think his success is going to be dependent on Matt Stafford. Hopefully Stafford can bounce back and have a better game moving forward. But so those were his 2 wins. He also took the Chargers over, so he missed on that one with me. He took the Panthers +1.5. So that game was, as a Panthers fan, that game was tough to watch from the beginning. Baker just looked like his timing was off, very inaccurate. And that game actually came down to the rookie Cade York knocking down a 58-yard field goal to end up winning that game. So, hey, it is what it is. The Panthers aren't supposed to be, a great team this year. Baker wasn't necessarily brought in to be the future. He was just brought in to be an upgrade from Sam Darnold. You can argue that he is being that, but I don't know. I mean, last year, start out the season, the Panthers started out great. I believe 3-0 with Sam Darnold doing a lot as far as rushing touchdowns. Baker had a rushing touchdown as well. So, and then he had that deep ball to Robbie Anderson, but the Browns rushing attack was just way too much for our defense. So So he missed on that one, and then he also missed on the Jacksonville Jaguars +2.5 against the Commanders. Carson Wentz came out slinging the rock, 4 touchdown passes. There was a lot of questions about what he was going to look like there for the Commanders, just because of the struggles he experienced last year in Indianapolis. So I don't lean one way or another on Carson Wentz. I know Avery is a huge Carson Wentz guy, so I'm sure he was excited to see him have that success. However, we've seen Carson Wentz have big games like this before and then follow it up with a complete dud. So we'll see how those games go today. But that's our wrap up of week 1. Let's go ahead and move on to week 2. Obviously, we have a big boy parlay. So I'm going to go ahead and give my 5 picks for this week, and then I'll share Avery's, and then I will round out my parlay with my last 2 picks. So it's a 7-leg parlay this week. But this week, I actually have the Browns -6.5 at home versus the Jets. The Jets obviously have a very solid run defense. However, the Browns and their rushing attack with Chubb and Hunt, I'm not sure that there's very many defenses in the league that are going to be able to slow those 2 guys down. Jacoby Brissett obviously looked serviceable last week. So I think he's going to be able to continue that this week against the Jets. So I'm taking the Browns -6.5. My next game is the Vikings. I have the Vikings +2 at the Eagles. So this is, in my opinion, this is going to be very similar to last week. The Vikings were the underdogs. Everyone expects the Eagles to come out and just, Jalen Hurts to have a big day. However, I think this is going to be another Justin Jefferson show, possibly another 2 touchdown performance, definitely over 100 yards receiving. So I think that this is going to be a close game. However, I think the Vikings are actually going to come out on top. I probably should have taken them money line. Because ultimately, 2 points, obviously, unless something crazy happens, isn't, a standard gap. Despite we saw a couple games that were decided by 1 point last week. So 2 points could make a difference, but I see the Vikings actually winning this game by 3. I would say it's going to end up being probably 24-21. So taking the Vikings +2. I also have the Steelers at +2.5 against the Pats. I think the Steelers looked pretty good last week. Obviously they went into overtime against the Bengals, won by a field goal. But, Najee Harris got a little banged up, but from everything I'm seeing, he's going through the game without an injury designation. Does that mean he's healthy? No, it just means that they don't have a designation on him. So I think Mitchell Trubisky is going to have a good passing week this week against the Pats. I just don't see the Pats offense really being able to do a whole lot. TJ Watt, I believe, is out with, the pec injury. But I just think the Steelers are going to be a little bit too much for the Pats. So I'm going to go ahead and take this game. I don't think this is going to be a crazy high scoring game. For this one, I'm going to go. Let's go with 16-7. We're going to go 16-7. But I do think the Steelers are actually going to come out on top. So if you want to take the Steelers money line, that'd be a pick that I'd be fairly comfortable with as well. And then my next game, I have the Raiders -5.5 at home against the Arizona Cardinals. I think obviously last week with a loss to the Chargers, the Raiders are going to be looking to bounce back. They're at home. I see Devontae Adams again just having a huge game here. I see Josh Jacobs picking it up in the running game as well. So I think this game is going to be decided by a touchdown, maybe 6 points, but 6 points still gets us our cover at -5.5. Next game I have is the Bengals -7 at Dallas. Obviously, Joe Burrow had a very rough week last week with all the interceptions and fumbles. I don't think that that's going to be a trend moving forward. I hope not, because of how much money that Cincinnati spent on that offensive line. I think the biggest difference maker in this game is going to be the fact that Cooper Rush is starting at quarterback. Nothing against him. He's just not Dak Prescott. The Cowboys offense last week had their own struggles anyway. So I see Joe Burrow having a huge bounce back game. I see Jamar Chase having a huge game here as well as Joe Mixon. So I think the Bengals win this game. I'm going to go ahead and say double digits. I'm going to take the Bengals. We're going to go ahead and say by 13. So score prediction for this one. Let's go ahead and go with 34-21. So I think it's going to, no, because I don't think the Cowboys are actually going to score that much. Let's go 34-14. 34-14. So it's actually going to be a bigger blowout than what I had initially thought it was going to be before I started talking out loud here, honestly. So those are my 5 picks. I have the Browns -6.5, Vikings +2, Steelers +2.5, Raiders -5.5, and then the Bengals -7. Avery is actually contrarian to some of my picks. So he's actually taking the opposite side in the Raiders game. He's taking Arizona +5.5. He's going to take the Pats money line. So obviously he wasn't comfortable with the -2.5 there. He thinks that this game's obviously going to be close as well. But he thinks that the Patriots are ultimately going to end up coming out on top, even though the game's in Pittsburgh, which I think is ultimately what's going to be the difference maker there. And then he's also taken the Jags +3. So that's at the Colts. Jags +3 of the Colts. I can see the Jags actually pulling this game out as a victory. The Colts are actually another leg of my parlay that I'm going to share. I put in this parlay before all this injury news came out that I believe Alec Pierce is out, Michael Pittman's going to be out, so a lot of questions at receiving. But I think ultimately Jonathan Taylor is going to be the difference maker in this game. Matt Ryan didn't have a great game last week. I would like to see him step it up, but obviously without having 2 of his main go-to receivers, that's going to be a challenge. So I think this is going to fall heavily on Jonathan Taylor and the Colts defense. I just wasn't impressed with Trevor Lawrence last week. I was glad to see James Robinson come back and kind of be the workhorse guy in that backfield and get in the end zone. I was high on the Jags last week. They let me down, and I just didn't see enough to be high on them again this week. So Avery's going to go with the Jags +3. I'm actually taking the Colts -3. Avery's also going to be taking the Saints +2.5 versus the Bucks. So for this one here, I think this is ultimately based on Brady's history against the Saints. Obviously, he's lost his last 4 against the Saints. So I don't know if that's going to carry on. There's some injuries going on with some of the receivers there in Tampa Bay. However, Alvin Kamara is also questionable at this point. I don't know if anything, at the time I'm recording this has come out saying he's going to be a for sure go or not. But I mean, I could see the Saints pulling this out +2.5. For me, it's hard to bet against Brady, regardless of who he has. He's never really had, I don't want to say he's never had star receivers, because he's had Randy Moss, he's had Mike Evans, obviously last year, Chris Godwin, but he's also done it without having any of those big name guys. So I'm not sure that's enough to sway me off the Bucks, nor is history, because Brady that's what he does, is he overcomes all those odds, and he's going to do things that people aren't expecting him to do. So if the Saints cover here, it wouldn't surprise me, but I would lean towards the Bucks. I stayed away from this game. And then Avery's also taking the Rams -10 versus the Falcons. Apparently he's not sold on the performance that he saw from the Falcons last week, and he's expecting the Rams to have a big bounce back here, which I would agree. The Rams are going to have to bounce back, because I don't think Sean McVay is going to let them, take a loss like that and then not have them prepared to dominate the next game. 10 points is a lot of points, especially for a team that didn't do very well last week. So that's essentially why, I stayed away from this game, but I could definitely see the Rams covering -10.5 here. Now, all that being said, I shared that the Colts were the 6th leg of my parlay. The 10th leg is actually the Buffalo Bills versus the Titans. The Bills are -10.5, but I just think the Bills offense is unstoppable, and their defense is, it's basically a steel curtain. you're not going to get through them. I see this game being a huge runaway. Derrick Henry's going to get his yards, even though he had a little bit of a struggle last week. I think Derrick Henry's still going to possibly eclipse 100 yards in this game, but I just don't think that's even going to be enough. I see the Bills running away with this one. Let's go with 38 to 14. 38-14 is what I'm going to go with this game here. I see it being a huge victory for the Bills. And as long as Josh Allen stays healthy, the Bills are going to be dominant all the way throughout the season. So I know this was a pretty short episode, but again, flying solo, I just wanted to make sure I came out here to get my picks out there, share them with you all. The odds for the parlay this week are plus 8,775. So if you were to bet $100, you could win 8,700 essentially. If your unit that you don't like that you bet with is lower than that, let's say it's $10, you still have a chance of winning $877. So big opportunity there. Again, little risk, big reward. These big parlays are tough to hit, but if you do hit one, obviously it's a good feeling. I saw on one of the Bleacher Report betting accounts that a guy cashed out at $252,000. 2 legs early, both those legs would have hit, so he would have hit for over $1 million. While that's exciting, extremely difficult to do, but still, I mean, $252,000 is nothing to sneeze at. So exciting for him. We're just hoping to hit one of these slightly smaller parlays, and I have a feeling we're definitely gonna cash at least one of these before the end of the season. But that's what I have for you all in this episode. Do me a favor, if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy the picks, even if you're fading our picks, if that's your strategy is to fade what Zach says, what I say, hey, I appreciate that. I'm glad I can be that resource for you. But if you enjoy it, tell your friends about it. Have them come check us out. We're also available with content on Instagram. We post all of our parlays there. We're available on Facebook. Then you can also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can listen to us on podcast platforms. If you're listening to us on podcast platforms, go ahead and check us out on YouTube also. But that's going to be everything for today's show. I appreciate it. I hope you all have a great football Sunday. Hopefully it's profitable. And we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.